Welcome, everyone. We are the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports, psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and my co-host is Anthony Carnevale. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, man. Been spent a lot of time watching football, both college and NFL, and has not disappointed. But NBA is going on. We got NHL on TV too, so a lot of sports to be watching. What are some sports that you've been kind of paying attention to lately?
Yeah, definitely the NFL. We're about to kick off fantasy football playoffs this week.
Okay.
So the NFL, watching everybody, making sure your starting lineups are picked. Yeah, so I've been watching a lot of football this trying to because I made playoffs in both leagues this year. So we're hoping to bring the trophy back home this year.
There you go. That's awesome. And one of the things that I noticed watching this past week, week 14, was just how often, mental skills are brought up. The commentators, I would say probably every other sentence have something to say about either the mindset or the cognitive orientation, the toughness, the determination, the poise that athletes bring to the field. And so, I can imagine you having your ear kind of tuned to that language a little bit could probably give you a leg up in the fantasy world too. You know what players are mentally on, what players might be a little bit off, but that was something that I've been watching with the NFL lately is just how often and how prominent the mental skills end up being in that commentary. Very rarely are we talking about some sort of technique, a running technique, or anything like that. But it's almost always something psychological that the announcers like to point out. So that was something that I noticed in the NFL, and obviously this past week was pretty interesting for college football as well. That being rivalry week. So I know you were pretty tuned into that as well.
Yeah. It's almost kind of like the exact opposite of what the NFL is going through. There's maybe some little to no poise in certain games. I know that these rivalry games bring up a lot of emotions, and it's something that's circled probably on everybody's calendar at the beginning of the season, all the way until the point of the game. But you saw, I think it was the Ohio State Michigan game. There was a brawl, a pretty big brawl, honestly, involved, and I think a couple other games kind of it looked like some people lost their composure and things got a little maybe more aggressive than they needed to after the game or even during the competition because there was this, a lack of the mental skills that you just mentioned being put into use. Poise and emotional regulation and self-regulation. It's all things that they seem to struggle with. But, last
Yeah.
week at least, it's understandable these big games. I'm sure everybody on campus when you're walking around probably hypes you up for the game. It's important to maybe recognize what your body's experiencing before the game and being able to regulate a little bit better.
Sure. I know I grew up down at the Ohio State campus, and pretty much the whole week leading up to that game, they X out all the M's in town. Every text that's sent in that city doesn't have an M in it. They call it the team up north. So there's definitely a lot of extra pressure for those guys. Especially that OSU Michigan game. You saw the OSU team just not be able to put it away. And you have to think, is it something psychological? They've been physically prepared and played well all year, but then under that extra pressure with all of their fans in the stands, can really put you over the edge. So to your point about the mental skills, allowing you to keep a lid on that. You're a little bit more in control. Your emotions aren't so much of a runaway train. And you have to think that some of those games, I mean, the OSU Michigan game in particular, both schools got fined $100,000. So it's definitely not helping you. So it's important to take those emotions and channel them in an appropriate direction rather than trying to punch someone and get pepper sprayed. So, um, also in other kind of championship news, we've got the NHL that's trucking along here. It's been interesting to watch the Florida Panthers here chase their second Stanley Cup. A lot of times those teams that win those championship games have somewhat of a kind of a post championship hangover where that next
Mm.
season's a little bit tough to stay on top. You have a bit of a target on your back. And the Panthers seem to be playing well, chasing again that back-to-back title. So that's been something interesting to watch, and I'm curious to know how those coaches prepared the team for that situation. maybe we can talk a little bit about that. If you were in that situation, what recommendations would you have for that kind of repeat top of the league team?
Yeah, yeah. I think, excuse me. It's curious. I don't know. I don't follow the NHL too much. I'm wondering. I guess the first question is how many people are returning. I think if you return a lot of your players from the championship team, it's easy to get back into that routine and to the habits that brought you to the championship and won you the championship the season before. Um, I'm a big believer in, we don't need to change the blueprint. If it worked last season, there's a probably good chance that a lot of it's going to work this season. Um, I think it's also important to take. I think you see a lot of the championship teams do take time off after a championship. But it's a really long season, 82 games plus however many games on top of that. I think it's important to have your time to rest, to celebrate, to enjoy your time off, and come back ready to lock in for the next season. I think it's just important to keep it simple for the time being to start.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, and also just they did have a little bit of turnover, just guys leaving and getting traded, but like what you said, don't change the blueprint, right? It worked, and so just try to rerun, what worked last year, and make small adjustments, but don't try to reinvent the wheel. I think that's really important. Speaking of contracts,
Really.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Speaking of contracts over in Major League Baseball, we just saw one of the largest contracts, I believe, in sports history.
Yeah.
$765 million for Juan Soto to play for the Mets, which it's an astounding amount of money for his contract, and it's really just a testament to the investment being put into sports. So I think for anybody watching this, peripherally, what's exciting is that amount of money now going into sports kind of motivates other players, right? Those second tier salaries, third tier salaries, those will also see a bump, right? Because we're seeing so much capital being put towards those contracts. So what's exciting to me is you can really see sports as an investment. So you're investing in youth sports for college scholarships. You're investing in college athletics for those professional contracts, and you can really see that it's becoming more of a very serious venture. It's an investment in your future. So training with physical therapists, athletic trainers, people like myself and Anthony here, to work on your mental game. All of these things are really strong investments in your future. And what we're seeing with this Juan Soto deal is that the payoff is there. Not to say that everybody should expect to get nearly $1 billion to play their sport, but as those salary caps go up, the professionals' salaries and contracts go up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of relating to investing, Chris Paul recently just had I think he's second all time now in total assists in NBA history. And I think it just shows the longevity of his career. Yeah, obviously invested a lot of time and energy into staying healthy, into creating good habits and routines, very similar to LeBron. I think Chris Paul often gets not talked about because of how great LeBron has been for such a long time, even longer than how good Chris Paul has been. And I think it shows that if you're willing to put the time and energy into your mind and into your body, there's a lot of payoff. And I think he's almost in his 40s. So is LeBron, and they're still playing at, as you can see, a pretty elite level against people that are 10, 15 years younger than them. So it shows that how far sports science has come, I think, one, and how far you can go if you put the right time and effort into your craft.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to think about someone who's had a career that is spanning, if he's in his 40s, he's probably been playing since he was, 6, 7 years old. So
Yeah.
how does that athlete avoid things like burnout and, just career-ending injuries? Not so much in terms of the physical injury, but sometimes people are injured and can never really psychologically recover. So, obviously there's been a lot of that investment in his longevity, but also I thought was really cool about this story was how much, because it's an assist record, how much support he had from his team.
Mm.
When you see like a point scoring record or a 3-point record, it's celebrated, but this felt different because it's a very selfless record. It's a record that um, you know it elevates your team around you rather than making the focus on you. So you saw that in the reaction of teammates. The Spurs gave him a plaque that had all of the names of the people he's assisted, which is pretty cool. But it really is more of a team award, a team record, rather than an individual one. So it's a huge testament to Chris Paul, his longevity, and also the investment in his team.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of these, elite athletes maintaining careers over a long period of time, I think it's also interesting to think, and this is changing gears to the swimming world and the Olympics world a little bit, but they just competed in Budapest, the Team USA for the world's short course championships. And in my head, we just finished the Olympics. And so to hear, Summer McIntosh and some of these other swimmers competing again at the world stage, setting world records, and competing at that highest level, so close to competing at the Olympics, it really just shows that those elite athletes are able to get right back into the swing of things. They're able to really hit the ground running, take a few, a little bit of time off, but really get back into training and keep their focus going, not resting on their laurels. And I wonder if that kind of forward progress is what helps a lot of them stay in the sport. When you take a break, that's when you might get reflective and think about some different things. But if you can keep moving forward, keep training, look towards the next thing, I think that's that can be really helpful for longevity.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's always that super fine line of being, determined and, hyper focused and motivated, and then on the other side of that really thin line is like being burnt out, being depressed, doing things without, I think sometimes without realizing how tired and exhausted they really are. And I think maybe sometimes that's just part of the process a little bit, is that you have to grind through some of that some of that tiredness, some of that exhaustion if you want to be at the Olympic level, the ultra elite level. But yeah, I think what you were saying there, I think if you continue doing it, it's a lot easier than stopping and starting.
Hmm.
Um, when you start stop kind of makes it really hard to maintain that motivation. And I think, if you have the right team around you, maybe you can recognize some of the things that went wrong maybe in your Olympic trials, or things that can improve on, and you can see the results really quickly if you kind of compete like in the Budapest games.
Yeah. And continuing on takes a lot of different forms, right? It doesn't mean you have to be in the pool 2 or 3 times a day swimming 10,000 yards,
Right.
right? You could be at home working on the mental game. You could be at home visualizing, right?
Mm.
Working with a coach or a trusted professional to develop good goals and kind of create that framework for moving forward. So moving forward takes a lot of different forms. It doesn't always have to be pedal to the metal training, but it can be more of that take a step back and plan and prepare for the next thing. But what's interesting to me is that these athletes who win gold medals at the Olympics, which is arguably the biggest stage in sports, and then they can celebrate that in the moment, but then move on and say, I've got something. What's up next? And I think that's a really strong mindset to have. So I do want to close the close the book here on the sports psych in the news. There's been some really interesting research that's come out of Germany in the last couple of months. Came out in October. It also revolves around swimming, this time in terms of relays and what the motivating factors are for relay swimmers. So as I said, this study came out of Germany. There were two studies kind of rolled into this one publication. The first, they evaluated a lot of statistics, so swimming results online. And one of the things that they found was that the bigger the gap between the second to last swimmer and the last swimmer, so that slowest swimmer on the relay is significantly slower than the other three swimmers. They found that swimmer performed better than an athlete that was a little bit more closely related to those top three athletes. So the difference between the skill differential led to a higher effort output, if that makes sense. So the researchers were trying to evaluate the social comparison theory versus the social indispensability theory. So it's I'm needed for this team, not like I'm comparing myself, but I'm a really crucial part of this relay. So the reason I bring this study up, the first study, is they found that the social indispensability hypothesis was more true. So that athletes who felt like they didn't want to let the team down, that they were that crucial, the crucial piece of the puzzle, they performed and outperformed athletes that did not feel that way. Then these researchers took a survey method to the German national team swimmers. So again, these are really high level elite athletes in Germany. And that corroborated the results. And they found that most athletes most often mentioned that idea of social indispensability. So, I am needed. I'm a necessary part of this team. I have to perform well for my teammates. That was really the underlying ethos. I love this study because it provided some practical implications for coaches.
Mm.
So while it is a swimming study, I think it does apply across the board. The practical implications of this being that coaches should really emphasize that indispensability belief, that thought of, you're part of this team because you have to be. You have to perform well for the benefit of the team, and that I'm competing for something larger than myself is what these researchers found to be the driving factor. So for coaches out there, what these researchers recommend is again reinforcing that idea of you're part of a team that needs you, and that kind of old school model of comparing yourself to others. Like, I want to compete better because I see other people competing well around me. That might not be as motivating as again that social indispensability model.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. I think, it makes a lot of sense. I think being able to compete. I think it also reminds me of another research study I saw. So not in sports, but this researcher took people and like they stood on a hill and they kind of like asked them how scared they were to like run down this really big hill.
Hmm.
And when they stood alone, they were a lot more scared. But when they had somebody like a friend or a person standing next to them, I think they said like the size of the hill and their perception shrank like 30%. So just even being able to have somebody up there with you makes the job and the goal seem a lot less big than it actually is.
Yeah.
So I think that could be something that just even having your teammates competing with you. Normally, I think people outside of swimming probably view it as an individual sport, and not so much a team aspect. So being able to have that team with you and what's often viewed as an individual sport, I think can help reduce the anxiety and all the pre-competition worries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for coaches, again, it's just reinforcing that idea. Athletes, I think, have that sense, kind of being a part of a team. They understand that they're a necessary part of the group. But to have a coach that then also says that out loud, I think can be really helpful in that goal of getting everybody's performance to the highest level. So a very cool study. It's very nice to see that researchers are looking at elite sports. A lot of times in this sports psych research world, we see a lot of novice athletes or just college undergrad students. But to see that they're incorporating German national team swimmers, they also had a very high the first study participants were from the NCAA, so there was like SEC champions, Big Ten champions. It was a very elite
Mm.
population pool that they looked at, which I think is a great direction for sports psych research moving forward, and giving really good practical recommendations for coaches. So,
Absolutely.
kind of sticking along that main topic here, or along that theme of motivating factors, things that drive you and drive performance. I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between state and trait factors. So state being STATE, being a more permanent, a more transient idea that it's really just the place that you're in right now. It's not necessarily an internal factor and it's not an internal component, but it's just your environment at the time, versus something more concrete and stable like your traits. So whether they can be personality traits or skill traits, I think that difference and that the difference between your current environment versus something a little bit more concrete is a really important difference to tease out. So I think we're gonna talk a little bit about that in terms of toughness, but then moving into motivation. So, Anthony, do you have some thoughts for us about the difference of state mental toughness versus something a little bit more concrete like trait mental toughness?
Yeah, I think, when you hear state versus trait, it oftentimes you're going to find that it's going to be a lot easier to be more determined and motivated if you're kind of in that trait sort of thing, sort of motivated state. If you're kind of constantly in this state where you're looking for motivation in different areas and having a hard time, it's it's not something that's going to last very long. I think about like times where you've maybe, I think we've all maybe as an athletes needed to find some motivation to get through a workout or something, or get through practice, and maybe you watch these YouTube videos that they get you all hyped up and stuff. But how long does that last? I feel that maybe 30 minutes is probably the max that usually before you have to maybe listen to it again.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the times I think when we do this, we're just trying to get ourselves through something that we don't want to do, or maybe we're doing something that's not aligned with our goals and our values. So we have to find other resources to get us through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about the idea of motivation and determination and kind of the differences there. But sticking with the idea of mental toughness, I love one of the examples that you had given, and I've used this in a number of workshops. But the idea of, I asked the question, what's tougher, oak tree or a palm tree? And again, this is, your example. But the idea is that everyone thinks the oak tree is tougher, right? Because it's, taller and sturdier. But the idea is that you don't see oak trees on a beach, where hurricanes
Right.
are. You see palm trees, and I always use this example to talk about the idea of kind of being flexible in a situation. So toughness as kind of a trait, as like you are a tough person, it's the ability to flex with your environment, to change with the environment, and to adapt to being the most fit at this time, right? But you're moving through the environment just like a palm tree moves through a hurricane untouched, whereas something like an oak tree, it might have that toughness in the moment, but it's not going to weather the storm. It's not going to weather the hurricane. It's more of that rigid, unchanging um, tough, toughness that is dependent on the environment, right? If the environment's bad, then it's no longer that tough.
Mm.
And so that's one of the things I like to think to highlight here is that state toughness is a little bit more rigid. It's that white knuckling, getting through a situation, and then seeing, how you come out on the other side. Whereas trait toughness is less dependent on the environment, and it's more dependent on something internal, and something that you've developed over time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll find that having that kind of being more of a palm tree, that flexibility, that mental flexibility is going to allow you to perform so much better under pressure and um big matches, big games, because at a certain point, if you're just keep doing the same thing over and over again, that's not being mentally tough. That's just being stubborn.
Mm,
And if you're able to kind of take a step back, because if you're flexible, you can maybe take a little bit more of a step back, be a little bit more mindful. You'll find that it's a lot easier to perform under these big scenarios.
yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about the differences between a state, which is environmentally based. It's a little bit more temporal. It changes. And then a trait is something that's more internal, more concrete, more stable. And I want to talk about that paradigm in the idea in terms of motivation. So in our 5 mental skills that we teach, we have chosen to go with determination over motivation for that reason. So determination is much more of a psychological trait, and motivation is more of a temporal state. So as you kind of alluded to, if you need to get motivated, that's where you're going to listen to music or listen to, a David Goggins video or something like that, that gets you in that mindset for a set period of time. Whereas someone who's determined, they can still use motivation, but they have more of a fundamental foundation that pervades more of their determination, if that makes sense. So determination is kind of the cherry on top of a determined athlete. So sticking with that, what are some things that you would recommend for an athlete to develop motivation, that short term, let's get ready for a game, let's get going, get your team ready, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think this one's a little bit easy. You just find I think there's some ways to get some quick hitters out there and get you pretty motivated. One is music. I think many athletes, not all athletes, seem to, at least when they show them on TV walking in, they have headphones on.
Hmm.
So presumably they're probably listening to music. I doubt they're going to be listening to like our podcast right before a big game
Sure.
or somebody else's podcast. So unless it's like a visualization script, the chance are they're probably listening to music, and that music can get you kind of locked in, get you motivated, get you ready, pumped up, or whatever state you need to be in, or whatever physiological arousal type of state you need to be in before the big game. Another one is these kind of pregame rituals that you have that will get you motivated. I think you'll find that developing a habit, developing a routine over time, as we said several times on this podcast, is helpful, and it'll get you kind of locked into the game. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of the times you'll notice that maybe you'll become more excited and more ready and more motivated as you're going through your typical routine or pregame ritual. So those are a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would highlight that how closely related, your psychology is to your physical activity. So, in any of the workshops that I do, and I'm sure that you do, one of the first things that we like to do is get the athletes up and moving, right? Because when you're
Hmm.
up and moving and physical, and your blood pressure's up a little bit, your heart rate's up, your brain works better, it works faster. So tying in some psychological rituals with a warm up routine or whatever that habit might be, can really help you kind of lock in both your mind and your body at the same time. I like to do this through what I call mental choreography. So when you think of choreography, it's a dance, right? It's a pre-planned dance that all the steps are mapped out. And that's really the same idea. So what thoughts do you want running through your head when you're doing your warm-up routine, when you're doing your pregame ritual? It can be really helpful to write those out and create, again, like you said, that routine, with those thoughts that accompany some sort of warm-up or pregame ritual. But I love the music. I think that's phenomenal. One of my favorites too, when people often are in their head a little bit before a game, maybe they might be nervous or just kind of thinking runaway thought train, is comedy. So it's really hard
Mm.
to think about anything when you're laughing. Laughter and comedy kind of take over. So if you do find yourself in that hyper worried, hyper anxious state, if you can get a couple laughs out of it, it's really hard to be anxious and laughing at the same time. So those would be, some of our recommendations for that short-term motivation, that state motivation. The trait of determination is a little bit more broad of a category, and it takes a little bit more time to develop. This is, it's really helpful to have coaches that are aware of what, self-determination is, what intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation is. And if you don't feel like you're getting that from your coach, it can be really helpful to talk to someone like either Anthony or myself, to work through that process. So determination from our angle is rooted in what's called self-determination theory. And that's an overarching theory of really human happiness and human activity, but directed towards sports. It's the idea of moving from external motivation. So, you're motivated by your coach telling you good job or getting paid or, getting ice cream after a game with your parents, towards you do it because you love it. That intrinsic motivation, that internal regulation, where even if you weren't getting paid, you would still do this thing. So think about, things like walking your dog, right? You do that because you're intrinsically motivated to, make your dog happy. You don't have to get paid to do it. Some people are, but, most of us who have pets aren't. Um, so that's the continuum. There's a couple steps along the way from that completely external motivation towards internal motivation that is that determined mindset. Um, there's a couple of components that have to be achieved along that road. Those are autonomy, the idea that you are in charge of your own destiny; relatedness, and that is how closely connected are you with your teammates or people in that sports environment, your coaches, your trainers, other teams, other athletes, your competition, how related to that community are you? And then the last one is competence. So you need to see yourself improving, right? It's very hard to be internally motivated or intrinsically motivated if you don't see progress towards a goal. Um, and so by kind of moving those three levers, that's how we can move from kind of an external, non-determined athlete to that highly determined internal motivation, intrinsic motivation. Um, as I said, it's helpful to have a coach that understands this process. A lot of these
Mm.
things, autonomy, that's directly related to coaching. Relatedness, a coach can really help with team building and building those relationships and competence as well. Uh, your coach is the one teaching you the skills. So if you're not improving, that's a coaching problem. So that you can see in the description of determination and motivation. They're two very different things that can kind of be stacked together. So you could have that underlying state of determination with that transient or temporal motivation kind of stacked on top of it. So I know that's a lot of information out there. Maybe Anthony, you can help us unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think for those that at home that don't know, Ian was able to talk a lot. I'm pretty sure your research was on this, wasn't it? So it's a wealth of knowledge for Ian, which is why he's able to describe it so beautifully and eloquently. Um, so yeah, I think what was coming up for me, because I think within self-determination theory, there's a lot of kind of psychic jargon and things that maybe a lot of people don't understand. In your research and in your time coaching, how did you kind of incorporate this into actual use?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say you just have to keep the three kind of levers in mind. So for autonomy, one of the things in swimming, it's very easy for like me as a coach just to write a workout, put it on the deck, and have the athletes do it.
Mm,
There's not a whole lot of autonomy within that. It's just me telling you what to do and you doing it. So one of the things that I had implemented, or I should say that the team that I helped implemented um, was kind of a choice, right? So we'd write a couple of workouts, and you'd have one group over here choose workout A, this group workout B, group workout C, and within that we wrote all the workouts, so we knew they were all hard, they were all beneficial, but just giving the athletes that small choice really made them feel like that they owned the practice. It was their choice to be there, so they were going to work hard. Whereas if they just did what I said, there's kind of an idea of like, I'll just get through it, right? It's not mine. I have no ownership over this. So that was one way that autonomy lever was manipulated. Relatedness, that's an easy one. That's just making your
sure.
team work well together. So whether that be things like team dinners or team building activities, or we did a lot of peer coaching. So that's like, you watch your teammates swim, you give them, pieces of advice based on what you saw. So that idea of we're each other's, cheerleaders and coaches and teammates, but creating as many ties within that as we can. Um, Also sharing goals, that was important because we could really share what motivated us. So then you could help motivate that person better in the
Mm,
future. So really increasing connections amongst the team. And then that last one, excuse me, that last one is competence. That kind of comes with coaching, right? You like to see their times getting faster, their technique improving. So highlighting that they are improving is really important. In swimming, you get to a point where you're not really seeing improvements on the time on your time. So you have to find improvements where they are, right? Maybe you got a couple extra dolphin kicks underwater. You held your breath a little bit better, but things like that as a coach, you can highlight that the athlete might not necessarily see. So you don't have to have, and I appreciate you saying that, you don't have to have a super high, you don't have to have a master's degree in psychology to understand this concept. But just keeping those three levers, autonomy, relatedness, and competency in mind when you're leading a team, that's kind of the underlying mechanism to drive an undetermined athlete to then being self-motivated, self-driven, and self-determined. So thank you for that question. I do appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Well said indeed. And it kind of always just like blows my mind, how just like giving not just athletes, but anybody like a little bit of autonomy, a little bit of choice in the things they're doing, and how much more motivated and determined they can be.
Yeah.
It's like with a child, you can pick out clothes for them, but give them two sets and they'll be happily, happily get changed and go to school with those clothes. And I think the same thing with the athletes. If you're able to give them choices and have them own what they're doing, the output is just so much greater and so much more efficient, and they work much harder too.
Yeah, I think it was Al Pettypaw who was kind of both of our mentors. He
Yeah,
talked about the difference between if you're teaching a kid how to how to swing a golf club. There's a difference between standing there and telling them all the technique cues and all the the grips and how to place your feet and things like that, or telling them no one your age has ever hit a golf ball over that fence over there, right? That kid's gonna
right.
stand there all day and try and hit a golf ball over the fence. Whereas if you're sitting there correcting their hands and correcting their feet, they're not going to do it for very long. And so just that simple like example shows that coaches that can motivate an athlete to do it because they want to, rather than just do what I say because I said so. It's harder though. I would say that it's harder to be a coach and give up a little bit of that control, because if you're standing on deck with 80 swimmers, it's very easy to just say everybody has to do what I say because it's just easier. There's less moving parts.
Mm.
But the best coaches are able to manage those two things at the same time, and that leads to very determined athletes rather than an athlete that constantly needs kind of boosts in motivation.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Well said.
Awesome. Well, I hope people that are watching this had found some things that they can take into their own sports career and life moving forward. Um, as always, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. We would love to answer them right here on the podcast. Um, but if you like what we said, please like, follow, share, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you in season 2.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll see you next year.